Hey friends, welcome back to Grand Adventure. I'm your host, Mark Guido, and greetings from the oldest continuously inhabited city in the United States. Of course, we're in St. Augustine, Florida, so come along. Founded in 1565 by Spanish explorers along what is now the northeastern coast of the state of Florida, St. Augustine is the oldest continuously inhabited European established settlement in the contiguous United States. The city served as the capital of Spanish Florida for over 200 years. It was designated as the capital of British East Florida when the colony was established in 1763, until Great Britain returned Florida to Spain in 1783 following the U.S. Revolutionary War. Spain ceded Florida to the United States in 1819, and St. Augustine was designated the capital of the Florida Territory in 1821. The Florida National Guard made the city its headquarters that same year. The territorial government then moved the capital of Florida to Tallahassee 3 years later. St. Augustine is part of Florida's First Coast region. Since the late 19th century, St. Augustine's distinctive historical character has made the city a popular tourist destination. In 1965, St. Augustine celebrated the 400th anniversary of its founding, and jointly with the state of Florida, inaugurated a program to restore parts of the colonial city. The historic St. Augustine Preservation Board was formed to reconstruct more than 36 buildings to their historical appearance, and today St. Augustine is a maze of tight streets and alleys lined by unique architecture that varies depending on whether it was constructed during the Spanish, British, or American periods. Henry Flagler, who along with John D. Rockefeller co-founded the Standard Oil Company, spent the winter of 1883 in St. Augustine and found the city charming, but considered its hotels and transportation systems inadequate. He had the idea to make St. Augustine a winter resort for wealthy Americans from the north, and to bring them south he bought several short-line railroads and combined these in 1885 to form the Florida East Coast Railway. Flagler completed the exclusive luxury Ponce de Leon Hotel in 1888. It was one of the first buildings in the country wired for electricity from the onset, with the power being supplied by DC generators installed by Flagler's friend Thomas Edison. The original building and grounds of the hotel are today a part of Flagler College. Flagler also built the 250-room Hotel Alcazar, which had a steam room, massage parlor, sulfur baths, gymnasium, a 3-story ballroom, and the world's largest indoor swimming pool. It closed as a hotel in 1932 and now houses the Lightner Museum. Opened in 1888, the Casa Monica Hotel is one of the oldest hotels in the United States, and Flagler soon bought the hotel from its developer. From 1888 to 1902, the hotel featured parties, balls, fairs, and charity events. Following a brief stint as the St. Johns County Courthouse from the 1960s to the 1990s, it reopened as a hotel once again in 1999. Constructed over 5 years from 1793 to 1797, the Cathedral Basilica of St. Augustine is home to the oldest Christian congregation in the contiguous United States, established in 1565. With a construction history dating to about 1723, the Gonzalez Alvarez House is believed to be the oldest surviving house in St. Augustine. St. Francis Barracks is a historic structure constructed of coquina stone. The barracks were constructed between 1724 and 1755 as a Spanish monastery and turned into a military structure by the British in 1763, after Florida became a British possession at the conclusion of the French and Indian War. The King's Bakery was constructed to supply bread to the British troops. It's believed to be the only structure remaining in St. Augustine built entirely during the British period. The Castillo de San Marcos in downtown St. Augustine is the oldest masonry fort in the continental United States, with construction beginning in 1672 and lasting 23 years. It's now a national monument operated by the National Park Service. Following a raid by the British privateer Robert Searles in 1668 that destroyed much of St. Augustine and damaged the existing wooden fort, Spanish authorities ordered the construction of a stronger fort to defend the city. Though built in part by black slaves owned by the Spanish, the fort later served as one of the first entry points of fugitive slaves from British North America into Spanish Florida, where they were freed by the colonial authorities. When Britain gained control of Florida in 1763, pursuant to the Treaty of Paris, St. Augustine became the capital of British East Florida, and the fort was renamed Fort St. Mark until the Peace of Paris in 1783, when Florida was transferred back to Spain and the fort's original name restored. When the Spanish ceded Florida to the United States in 1821, the fort was designated a U.S. Army base and renamed Fort Marion, in honor of American Revolutionary War hero Francis Marion. It was also occupied by Confederate forces during the U.S. Civil War. The fort was declared a national monument in 1924, and after 251 years of continuous military possession, was deactivated in 1933. Castillo de San Marcos was attacked several times and twice besieged. First, by English colonial forces led by Carolina Colony Governor James Moore in 1702, and then by English Georgia Colonial Governor James Oglethorpe in 1740, but was never taken by force. The Castillo is made of a stone called coquina, which consists of ancient shells that have bonded together to form a sedimentary rock similar to limestone. The coquina was quarried from the King's Quarry on Anastasia Island across Matanzas Bay from the Castillo, and ferried across to the construction site. Matanzas Bay is the obvious way to reach St. Augustine from the sea. However, a ship could also travel the back way, from the south at Matanzas Inlet via the Matanzas River. Such an approach avoided St. Augustine's primary defense system at Castillo de San Marcos, and in 1740, Georgia Governor James Oglethorpe used just such a route to besiege St. Augustine for 39 days. So the Spanish built Fort Matanzas in 1742 to guard Matanzas Inlet. Today, Fort Matanzas is a national monument operated by the U.S. National Park Service. However, the fort lies on present-day Rattlesnake Island, accessible only by boat. From the Visitor Center, park visitors board a free ferry for the 5-minute trip to the island several times per day. A boarding pass is required, and they frequently sell out each day by late morning. No reservations are available. Convicts, slaves, and troops from Cuba were used as labor to erect the structure, which, like the Castillo, is made of coquina. The standard garrison of the fort was 1 officer in charge, 4 entrymen, and 2 gunners, although more troops could be stationed if necessary. All soldiers of Fort Matanzas served on rotation from their regular duty in St. Augustine. While you're waiting for the ferry to the fort, the National Monument includes a beautiful half-mile boardwalk that passes through the coastal hammock to the dunes near Matanzas Inlet. By 1565, the French built Fort Caroline along Florida's Atlantic coast, encroaching on Spain's territory in the New World. A French fleet from Fort Caroline was sent to attack St. Augustine, but was devastated by a storm. With most guards from Fort Caroline now shipwrecked, the Spanish were able to easily capture Fort Caroline and found the wrecked French fleet here at Matanzas Inlet. The Spanish killed the nearly 250 survivors, leading to the name for this inlet, which is the Spanish word for slaughter. Of course, this wouldn't be Florida without the beach. Downtown St. Augustine is connected to St. Augustine Beach on Anastasia Island by the Bridge of Lions across the Matanzas River. Anastasia Island is a barrier island like many along the Florida coast. And like only a few Florida Atlantic coast beaches, most notably Daytona, here you're allowed to actually drive on the beach. The 165-foot St. Augustine Light Station is an active working lighthouse that stands at the north end of Anastasia Island. It was built between 1871 and 1874. The next barrier island to the north of St. Augustine is home to not only the communities of Volano Beach and Pontevedra Beach, but also the island is occupied by, and I'm probably mispronouncing this, the Guana Tolomato Matanzas National Estuarine Research Reserve. Well, that's a mouthful. With extensive salt marshes, terrific bird watching, and natural undeveloped beaches. For our week in St. Augustine, we're staying just 4 miles from downtown at Sun Outdoors St. Augustine, formerly known as Compass RV Resort. The 168-site full hookup RV park is divided into 3 sections: the Grove, the Pond, and the Oasis. We're staying out in the Oasis, which in our opinion is the most attractive of the 3 sections, with spacious sites anchored by these beautiful brick paver pads. middle section is called, appropriately, the pond. However, here the pads are gravel, and they're nevertheless spacious and come with a concrete patio. The section closest to the entrance is the Grove, where most of the sites are shaded from the intense Florida sun by a thick stand of live oak trees. However, aside from the trees, there's little vegetation in the Grove, and the sites are the tightest in the park. We presume that this is the oldest section. Our cost for a week here in the Oasis averages $52 per night plus tax. And amenities here range from an outdoor pool to laundry and propane, a fitness center, on-site Dollar General store, RV storage, several fenced dog runs, a nature trail, and curbside trash pickup. Zoe is absolutely loving the smaller dog run right across from our campsite. Believe it or not, at night we've actually heard some of Florida's 1,000 or so feral monkeys raising a ruckus in these woods behind our site. There have been sightings here in St. Johns County for the past several years. So we truly hope that you've enjoyed coming with us to St. Augustine. Coming up next week, we're going to be heading over to the Gulf Coast of Florida. So if you're not yet a grand adventurer yourself, this is the perfect time for you to go smash that little red subscribe button. It's the one right down there in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And ring that notification bell to be sure that you never miss a grand adventure that we air every Wednesday evening. We'd be honored if you shared the channel with your friends, family, and on social media. But understand, it is extremely important to us that if you like this episode, please be sure to give us a big thumbs up down below. And while you're down below, you'll find the comment section, and we'd love to hear from you after each grand adventure. So until next week from Florida's Gulf Coast, please remember, life is nothing but a grand adventure. We'll see you then.